Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I'm very happy to be here. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for facilitating this event and giving me the opportunity again to share some insights from my story. And I thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the opportunity to share something together, because hopefully it's not just going to be a one-way conversation, that we'll be able to have some question and answers InshaAllah. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. My story. Now, it's very difficult to talk about your story, anyone's story, especially your own personal story, because it's always going to be retrospective. You're always going to look back into the past and try and connect dots, right? So every time I tell this story, it's like I'm telling another story, because you see different things. Because we don't have all knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all knowledge. Allah is Al-Hakim, He is the wise. Allah is Al-Alim, He is the knowing. Allah has the totality of wisdom and knowledge. We just have small pieces, fragmentary pieces of that knowledge. An easy way to put it is Allah has the picture, we just got the pixel, right? So hopefully I'll do some justice to the story, and hopefully InshaAllah I'll be able to share some wisdom, maybe some insights, without getting too emotional, because I get quite emotional when I give this story. It's even more emotional because one of the key persons in my life that helped me become Muslim is in this room, and I hardly see him, and that's why I jumped into the audience and embraced him and gave him a big kiss. So if I do get emotional, I do apologize if that affects you in any way, but I'm just going to try and be me and the authentic version of me. So let's proceed. I became Muslim around 16, no, more than 16, it's like 2002. 17 years ago nearly, right? And before me embracing Islam, I was just a normal kid, I guess, living in Hackney, and I was brought up in the 1980s. So I was born in 1980, and I was brought up in an estate called the Downs Estate. It's like built in a ditch, right? And it wasn't the best of all areas. I came from a working class background. My dad used to work in the factories. My mom didn't work because my dad didn't want her to work. My dad felt that the best job for a woman is for her to be a mother and to take care of her children. So as you can see, early on I had a kind of traditional upbringing from the perspective of morality. My dad felt that a mother's job is a very difficult job, because it's not just 9 to 5, it's actually 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, men, they wake up in the morning, they go to work at 9 and maybe finish at 6. Okay, fine, they may do overtime, they come back 8, 9, but then they can rest somewhat. But a woman, she, generally speaking, in a traditional household, she has to basically take care of all the children and do everything else. And I think it's very important that I highlight this point, because sometimes motherhood is underplayed in our society, right? Because we live in a kind of neoliberal society, everyone's empowered, right? Everyone needs to work and pay taxes. And, you know, being a mother is seen as something secondary. But I think, you know, from an Islamic traditional point of view, it is the most important job. I mean, when I think about my wife and what she does and achieves with the children, I'm like, I take my hat off. Allahu Akbar, honestly. I could never do it. I mean, if I had her role for like 6 hours, I would probably just give up. I'd be like, khalas, this is not for me, yeah? It's actually a stressful job. It's actually something that drains your soul, right? And that's why I have this kind of tadabbur, this kind of pondering that a woman's soul is far more spiritually enriched than a man's soul, because she has to give more of her soul, right? Because that's what generally happens when you have that type of family, that traditional family that is, you know, focused on the mother and the children. So anyway, point is, I was brought up in that type of environment, and working class, and I was brought up in Hackney. Now, Hackney in the 1980s is not Hackney now. Now, if you see Hackney now is a bit gentrified, as they say. You know, you get all these, you know, middle-class people walking around, and, you know, there's some, like, underground posh type of bars, or, you know, cool bars, and these 24-hour restaurants, and, you know, the Turks have taken over, and all of that stuff, right? It wasn't like that in the 80s. It was, you know, relatively rough. I'm not saying it was really bad, but I think you could call my area as some type of ghetto. And I don't mean it like, you know, I was a ghetto boy or anything. I used to hang around with those type of people, but I wasn't like, you know, someone who was like malicious or in a gang or anything like that per se. So I was brought up in that type of environment. But what was very unique about my upbringing is because my dad, he comes from Greece, and my mum is Greek Cypriot. They had what you call, well, especially my dad, he had a different approach to life. So he wasn't nationalistic at all. He didn't really value, you know, these false lines that someone draws on a map. Yeah, he was like, this is just man-made. He felt that, you know, what makes us human is exactly that, our human nature, not these things that we've made up. So I was brought up in that type of environment where my dad was like a new age hippie, you know, bit of a humanist, bit of a spiritualist type. And so I was brought up with those type of values. Now, before I get into that, my mum came to the UK in 1975, I believe, because she was a refugee from the Turkish-Cypriot conflict that happened in 1974. So she came here actually as a refugee. She had a refugee status. And she basically would, you know, run in the morgues looking for her brother, because her brother had to be in the front line engaging in the conflict. So she came from that kind of perspective, and she came here when she was 17 or 18 years old. My dad came in 1973 or 1974, not for those reasons obviously, because he was from mainland Greece. He came because he just wanted to escape Athenian life, right? And my dad was homeless for around 9 months. And my dad was always very ethical, like very kind of principled. He would never want to break his principles just to preserve them. He didn't have that approach. He always had very high standards for himself. So when my dad was homeless, he would never steal. He was offered drugs, and, you know, to get his way out of the homeless scene and onto the streets and, you know, hustle. He had an opportunity to basically do something that got him away from, you know, the cardboard, if you like. But he rejected all of that because, you know, he felt there was a higher being, and he had a duty, a moral duty, and those duties were owed to that higher being, and he felt, look, I can't do stuff like this. So, alhamdulillah, he stopped being homeless after 9 months, and he managed to work in the factory business, the clothing factory business. And in the early 80s, it was relatively good in the UK. But I think after 88, 89, things moved into Europe, and basically his business kind of crashed from that point of view. And what's very interesting about my father, when it comes to business and stuff like this, he was the kind of person that would borrow money in order for his people, that he basically, his workers, his employees, thank you, Zafar. I'm a bit jet lagged, yeah, so I came from Canada a few days ago, so my brain is still a bit frazzled.
That's why I'm here.
That's why he's here. Ali Dao is my dictionary today, alhamdulillah. So his employees, he would basically pay them because he felt, you know, they had families, so he felt responsibility. And my dad was the kind of person that wouldn't sack them immediately. He would basically try his best and even borrow money, and even make his family, like his children, eat potatoes for 2 weeks to basically ensure that he, you know, took care of his people. So that's my dad, right? Anyway, it didn't go really well, and he ended up basically not doing that great as a result. So I came from that kind of environment, and my dad used to teach us about Jesus, but he did it in a non-Christian way. So he wasn't focused on the Bible per se, because he felt that religion was based on dogma, it was fake, false stories. But the idea of Jesus, in terms of, you know, someone that preached love and compassion, that was very central to his being, yeah? So the way he interacted with his children was like that. But he also used to read a lot about mysticism, and he used to read about, you know, the power of positive thinking. and he used to read the book The Science of the Mind by Ernest Holmes. So I had this literature at home. So he took a bit of mysticism, he took a bit of science in the mind, he took a bit of, positive thinking, and he brought it all together in order to basically start teaching his children how we should be and how we should live life. So the ideas of compassion, the ideas of self-development, the ideas of positive thinking, the ideas of love were very central to the home. Now don't get me wrong, there were always contradictions, like every family and every human being is a walking contradiction, because you have principles and you aspire, and you're not always going to be those principles. It's very difficult. But nevertheless, those principles were at home, and I would see them in my dad's life as well. Irrespective of his many mistakes. We all make mistakes, but some of those key principles were at home. For example, he would give all of his inheritance to his brother, or he would give it away in order for his mother and father to stay together. He would take the blame, right, in order to solve family problems, even though he didn't deserve any blame. So that was my dad, right? So I was brought up in that type of ethos and that type of environment. And my dad, didn't really give a damn what people thought. He would just say his ideas, he would just express himself. So those are kind of characteristics that I picked up. Concerning my mother, she didn't really have, a kind of theology or a kind of worldview. She just followed my dad. She was very, very loving. I think, a lot of the expressions of love I got from my mother, right? And that's why I like, sometimes just relatively recently reading Greek poetry, because the Greek language is a very deep language, and especially poetry on love, it's actually really powerful, and because it engages with me, because the first language that I understood when I was a child in terms of love being expressed was actually the Greek language. So I got that from my mum, obviously, and my mum was extremely possessively loving. I think she had what you call in Arabic ishq. Ishq is like the type of love that is like a possessive, overwhelming, overpowering type of love, right? So, and I got that from my mom. So, alhamdulillah, Allah took care of us. Yeah, it wasn't always easy. From what I remember, we used to collect coins from the sofa, and I had to put them together, and I had to go to the chemist to buy my mum's sanitary towels, right? So it wasn't always easy. There was periods of unemployment from my father. But I was just a Hackney kid that was brought up in Hackney, multicultural Hackney, went to Shackwell Primary School, went to Kingsland Secondary School at the time. Now it's called Petchy Academy, I believe. But one central thing about my house was that my dad taught us to be humanistic, taught us to be open-minded, taught us to respect people and to love people. Like, lots of people came to my house, white kids, brown kids, black kids. You had an array of colours, and that's one of the utmost blessings of being brought up in Hackney in the 80s and the 90s. So that's kind of my upbringing. And obviously I would see my dad's development as well, by the way, because my dad wasn't static. He had this kind of development. And what I noticed in my dad's life continuously was what you call now an existential crisis, right? Trying to solve life's problems, like, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? Whose am I? For whom am I? So those questions were very profound for my dad in some way. Maybe he didn't always articulate them, but you could just see it in his face. He was trying to find something and read and develop and, try and find solutions to life's crisis, because life is a crisis. Life is suffering, guys. It's not all easy. Maybe you're a bit young to think it's suffering, but when you get a bit older, life is going to kick you in the mouth, and it's going to be dark, and you're going to look for your teeth. And the thing with life is that you're going to choose your suffering. You have to choose what path of suffering to take, because life is going to be a test. And sometimes you're going to be tested with suffering. And we have to learn how to respond to that. And obviously the Quran and the Sunnah and the pious predecessors give us the spiritual tools in order to navigate that, but we could talk about that later. So that's my kind of upbringing. So as a child, who was I growing up? Well, I had some of my dad's ideas, and I would always see my dad as a hero from that point of view. Yes, I would still acknowledge some of his mistakes, but we're all human. But I still saw him as this kind of hero type figure because of his principles, because of the way he was, because of his care, because of his intention to be loving, right? And his intention to be caring, and because he would even say sorry to his children. There's not many fathers who ask their children for forgiveness, right? My dad was like that. I learned forgiveness from my house, and I learned not to hold a grudge from my house. And because my dad was actually like that. He was that kind of person. He would forgive very easily, and he wouldn't hold a grudge. Yes, sometimes he'll moan and groan, right? Like we all moan and groan. But, would he be the person that would hold hatred or enmity or malice or hold a grudge? No, that wasn't my father at all in any shape or form, right? So as a kid, growing up in that environment and going to secondary school, who was I? Well, I don't know. I was a bunch of different conflicting ideas and values. I was trying to find myself, I guess, like any other kid. You just you have a bunch of instincts, and you have your emotions, and you have your upbringing, and you have peer pressure from school. So you're just a combination of that. So I wouldn't really say I had an identity per se. In a way, I was somewhat misplaced. I come from Hackney, and I go to school, and on Saturdays I go to Greek school. And the Greek school that I went to was in Wood Green. That was the middle class area for us. And, I would not really feel connected to the Greeks at school because they came from a totally different demographic. They came from a different background, the middle class, I'm working class. I wasn't brought up as a kind of Greek in terms of nationalistic. Some of them may have been, especially when you're a minority, you hold on to your culture much more, don't you, right? I didn't do that, but they did, so I couldn't really connect with them. So when I was at Greek school, one example to put this, to bring this home, is I remember when the priest was there, because a lot of the teachers were priests as well, and every 4 weeks we have to have a Holy Communion at the Greek Orthodox Church. And one day, I think it was the beginning of the year, everyone was sitting around, it was all tables in a type of rectangle, and everyone was sitting around. And he asked everybody, what makes you Greek, right? And everyone's giving all these sub-stories about what makes them Greek. And by the way, some Greeks, I don't mean this in an offensive way, they have what you call a historical complex. Just because they have Socrates and Plato, they think they're somebody now. They're wrong. Greeks are, they're amazing people, they're family-oriented, they're really decent people, and there's good and bad in every society and culture. Just like what Allah says in the Quran, in verse 113, in chapter 3, verse 113, people are not the same. And this refers to the Christians and the Jews, and even Allah says there are upright people amongst these people. So everyone's, no one's the same. But the point is, generally speaking, Greeks can have a bit of a historical complex, yeah. But anyway, so everyone's saying why they're Greek, and then I was in the middle. So he passed around 15 people, and he said, right, what makes you Greek? I think I was showing off as well, to be honest, but I think I meant it as well because it was from my dad's ideas and values. I said, well, I don't really consider myself Greek. My dad teaches me to be human, right? That's the most important thing, and these are fake boundaries. I don't really remember what I said, but it was to that effect. And then, you can imagine everyone's like, oh my God, what is he saying? He's being anti-Greek kind of thing. And the priest looked at me and he paused and he said, that's a Greek idea. So that sums up my kind of experience at Greek school. But you know what's really funny? My mum would always, because I would want to bunk Greek school and play football on Saturdays, and sometimes I would bunk, right? But my mum would always say to me, Mia mera θα με θυμίσεις. You're going to remember me concerning her wanting me to go Greek school, and she's so right, because I've used Greek for the da'wah, for sharing Islam. And also just from my own personal enjoyment and development, because the book that we went through when I started to do A-level Greek was a book by Andonis Samoragis, and he wrote a book called Zedida El-Bis, which means hope wanted. And in those books are very powerful short stories. And those short stories, for me, I think really show why people need Allah in their lives. And one short story that's really powerful for me is a short story called Mia Nichta, which means one night. And it's a very, very powerful story. I'm not going to tell you the story now, but it ends by basically... Actually, let me quickly tell you the story. I think it would be better. So the story is, this is a really, really lonely man who has solitude, and he's got anguish and depression and anxieties of life, and he really wants to express himself, but he can't express himself. There is some kind of barrier, and his major issue is this depression and anguish and anxiety. And he basically wants to, the questions of life and all of these things, and he wants to express himself. He needs an outlet, someone to express himself. But he can't find that person. And in his office one day, it starts to snow, and the typist says, look, it's snowing, and all the office goes and touches the snow or looks at the snow, and he's still in the corner of the office, and she says to him, come over, and he basically ignores her, doesn't want to come over, and she says to him, I know what your problem is, you love loneliness and solitude, right? And he gets really upset because internally he's saying, no, I really need to speak to somebody. I have these anxieties, these problems, these concerns, this type of depression, all of these things, right? So he tries to get, he sums up the power to try and break through and trying to speak to someone. So in the evening or the afternoon when they're leaving work, and now it's all snowing, it snows everywhere, he wants to go and speak to her. But as he's walking out, he's about to speak to her, but her scarf drops and she turns around and he can't say anything. He says, oh, your scarf has dropped. So that gets him into this, kind of internal frenzy. He's like, oh my God, I need to speak to someone. So he decides to go for a long walk in the snow. And he's walking for hours, and there's an internal narrative going on. He's like, if only I believed in a higher power. He said, if only he could pray. The story goes, if only he believed in a higher power, he would ask one thing: the ability to express himself, the ability to talk to someone, because that was the outlet, that was the solution to him, because he had all of these anxieties, questions, etc. So he's walking, it gets really dark, he goes to an industrial estate, and it's really dark, and he sees past the factory, near a wall, a person with a felt hat staring at him, motionless and still, just like he was. And he was dominated by fear. But then that fear left, and he felt really close to the stranger, that person, because that person was just like him, alone in the dark. So all of a sudden he gets this wave in his heart, and his heart like breaks open, and he starts to express himself. He's got his solution now. He's got his solution. So he's talking and expressing himself and talking, and then he's talking what seems to be many, many hours, and then it starts to be dawn. And then he realizes that person was a snowman. Yeah, it's a really sad story. So those are very powerful stories. So the Greek literature allowed me to get those stories and realize, subhanAllah, without Allah, we're just really talking to snowmen, right? Anyway, I paraphrase that story, but it's very powerful. I'm in the process of translating it, by the way. I thought it would be good to share everybody. Anyway, moving on, I'm sorry for the waffles, right? So that was my background. So how did I find Islam? Well, because I was brought up in this kind of different type of environment, different ideas and values, and even the social space I was in, because Hackney is the best place to live in the world, man. I'm a Hackneynian, whatever you call it, and I fly the flag for Hackney because beautiful people, right? And I met beautiful people. So one of the people are in this room, Brother Moinul Ahmed, may Allah bless him. He's in this room, and he was my friend at secondary school, and there was very something distinct about him. Like, he really wouldn't mix with girls. And I was like, what's so weird, man? Because Greeks, they mix with everything, yeah? So I found that a bit distinct, and he was like, we've got to keep our boundaries, innit? These kind of social norms, we got to respect women, and we got to care for them kind of thing. And, he had this kind of honor for women, which I thought was really, really powerful, which you don't really find in Hackney in the 80s and 90s at secondary school, that's for sure. And he wouldn't touch alcohol as well, especially in science class. I was like, why is he not doing that? Now, I didn't understand why, but those things were actually really distinct, and that shows to you that just because, even if people don't understand your practice, they'll be attracted to you because you are distinct. You have a stance about something, yeah? And that shows a hell of a lot of integrity, because people want to engage with other people who have integrity, because it's a sign of trust, and trust is the basis for all types of relationships, all types, right? Friendship, marriage, whatever, and you can't buy that, yeah. So when you have that stance, it says a lot. Don't think, oh, they won't understand me. So what? You don't even understand yourself. You think someone's going to understand you? Keep to your principles, because once you do that, you're distinct. You show you have integrity. Therefore, you're a person of trust. Therefore, you're a person that I would want to connect with, right? So I connected with the boy, and he was like giving me dawah. So he gave me this book. It was called Faith in Progress, and it was a really powerful book. It really engaged with my fitrah. It awakened the innate disposition, and the book talks about why God exists, and it talks about why the Quran is from Allah. That's simple, right? And I just find it, I found it quite simple but yet profound, and it created an awakening. But that wasn't enough. So what I started to do is, because I started to engage with the idea of Islam much more, by the way, before that I used to dabble in a bit of Buddhism, maybe meditate, maybe read about Tibetan Buddhism. So I had all these different types of ideas. But Moino would always come and visit me, and would, he was trying to engage with me and trying to teach me about Islam. So when I was at university, or towards the end of university, he basically was trying to push that idea much more. But during that period, I started to learn how to pray, because I picked up this book called Islam in Focus. And I really liked the book. I used to read it during work hours, like during lunch period. And I learned how to pray through that book, from that book. I learned Surah Al-Fatiha. I think I learned Surah, the short surahs, or one of the short surahs. And I did wudu, and I prayed. So I used to pray in the masjid sometimes, right? And I remember when I was in Hackney, in Stoke Newington, I used to wear some tight t-shirts, and maybe my aura was showing. I got told off by one of the imams. He thought I was Muslim. He was like, hey, don't come here like that again, kind of thing, yeah? But yeah, I used to pray. And I remember someone who now is my friend, he wasn't a doctor, he's a doctor now, Dr. Amir Islahi, beautiful, archetypical male, alpha male, but very loving, very nice, soft brother as well. Beautiful brother. I mean, he's around East London. He runs Legion Fitness, wrestler, amazing person. He was my brother's friend originally, and we always looked up to him because he had these distinct principles. Again, a distinctness about him. This kind of this character, this something that you don't see often. He was a contrast, isn't it? Just like what Shakespeare says about contrast in Romeo and Juliet, when he says it's like a white jewel on an Ethiop's ear, or a dove amongst crows. So, Dr. Ahmed, he was like a dove amongst crows, right? And I remember he came to our college. At that time it was called Hackney Community College, or Shoreditch College. And he basically would say, when you're in sajda, you're closest to your Lord, so speak to your Lord, kind of thing. It's based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. I wasn't even a Muslim, but when I remembered that, I used to talk to Allah, talk to God in sajda. And I remember I went to East London, the Tabligh Jama Markas, the Markas, right? I went there. They do it on Thursdays, isn't it? Do they still do it on Thursdays? There's like hundreds of people there. I went and I prayed, because I had another friend called Zaino, who was my brother's friend as well, who basically encouraged me and talked to me about Islam, and he would be distinct in his own way as well. Like, he was the only person my dad trusted to be upstairs, even if my sister was upstairs, right? In the house, when he came to visit me or my brother. And if he was upstairs with my sister, say she's in a room and he's just gone in my room or my brother's room or whatever, my dad I remember my dad saying that he trusts him. And that's rare, right? And I remember another time when Zaino, he basically said to me, we don't do things for you or other people. We do things for Allah. And I was like, whoa, that was a brand new idea for me. It actually made me feel sick. I went to the toilet and my stomach was like, how can you do something for other than yourself? But that's powerful, because doing things just for yourself is ego. Doing things for Allah, who's eternal and the one who's worthy of it, has so much meaning, right? But obviously as a kid and not being Muslim, you have that barrier, you have that ego. So it's about me, isn't it? I want to be happy, I want to do things for myself. And I don't want to do things for other people, but doing things for Allah, that was a brand new concept for me. So that distinct idea as well really resonated in some way, or really it planted a seed in my heart and mind. So all of those things came into play. And one day, I think Moino, on October the 4th, 2002, he came to my house. And what's interesting about Moino, he wouldn't walk to my house, he would have to drive all the time. I remember how lazy he is. He's here, I could say that about him, right? So, alhamdulillah, so he would always come with the car. So he had the car, so he came to see me. And basically, he sat me down and said, look man, what's going on? You're already Muslim, you know what's going on. But for me, it wasn't just the intellectual stuff. That wasn't enough. That's why I was praying. That's why I was trying to engage with ideas. But what he told me was like a narrative about death. I don't really remember what he said, but I remember going home, it was late night, putting the toilet seat down, sitting on the toilet seat and texting him and saying, you scared the beep out of me, or something like that. Because I remember, it wasn't death, it wasn't the kind of idea of death that, I'm scared. It was more like, what now? You have to face your personal apocalypse. what are you going to do? You're not going to be here forever. There are implications to ideas and values that you believe in, that you find to be true within yourself. What are you going to do about them? It was that kind of fear, right? It wasn't that, oh, I'm scared fear. It was more meaningful than that, yeah? And that just hit me, and something awakened within myself, within my innate disposition, as we say, the fitrah. It was unclouded in some way, and the truth within shined through, because we believe every single human being has that truth inside them. And on October the 5th, on a Saturday, 2002, I went to Regent's Park Mosque, and I became Muslim. So, but the journey started then. You think the journey starts when you become Muslim? Yeah, but before Islam, no, the journey starts when you become Muslim, right? So, alhamdulillah, I already knew how to pray. So my first formal salah, if you like, was Dhuhr, right? So I started praying, and then I started going to Azizi, the Turkish masjid, because my mum, we moved away from the estates and we moved to Stoke Newington, which is still Hackney. But next to my mum's house is Azizi Mosque, which is the Turkish mosque. So I used to go there for Fajr. And wallahi, it was such an amazing experience, yeah. Literally, it was like someone took my soul and just dipped it in some divine honey, yeah. That's how I could, it was sweet. But that sweetness quickly went, right? And that's what happens with people who are developing themselves Islamically. Because, you know, issues started. So, obviously my parents found out I was a Muslim, but that wasn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things. Yes, my dad found it very difficult to accept in the beginning, because he felt, look, it's like it was a betrayal to his principles. He felt he was progressive, spiritual, that he moved away from dogma. And I don't blame him, because his knowledge of Islam was very limited. But really, in all due respect, our relationship, I had it very easy. I'm not like the kind of new Muslim that says, oh my God, my parents hated me. Nothing like that. Parents very loving, very caring. So in the grand cosmic scheme of things, I had it very easy, alhamdulillah. But the major issue for me, and the major challenge for me, was me. You know, I always say to brothers and sisters that the greatest enemy is the inner me, in the grand cosmic scheme of things, right? And, you know, when Allah says, indeed Allah will not change the situation of a people until they change what's within themselves. And if what's within yourself, whether it's your sin or your transgressions or the blemishes of your heart, the spiritual diseases, you know, that's going to manifest itself not only in your life but in the wider cosmos. And this is our tradition, and we've neglected this because we always like blaming others all the time. Don't get me wrong, we should command the good, forbid the evil, but we forget the inner sciences of Islam in accordance with the Quran and Sunnah and the way of our pious masters, the pious predecessors. And they always had this narrative. They always had this understanding that they felt they were the weakest link. That maybe it's because of me that we don't have success, right? But for us, it's, you know, we've got this social media warrior mentality, yeah? Everyone's taking each other to account on social media, but you know, the person can't even bench press his own duvet at Fajr time. Or we're always blaming Islamophobia. You know, I find that as a very negative narrative for me. Don't get me wrong, yes, people do hate Islam, for sure. And people do injustice, for sure. But we use it as an excuse because we have our own, you know, kind of spiritual trauma that we're dealing with, right? And I always say to brothers and sisters sometimes, where were the Islamophobes when you couldn't wake up for Fajr? Or when were you shouting at your mother, yeah? But they're not there, right? And that's why we like to blame them for everything, right? It creates what I call a kind of a defeatist mindset, which is not the mindset of the Sunnah or of the way of the Sahaba, in my view. Anyway, where was I? Get me back on track.
So you just came to Islam, the journey just started.
Oh, my journey just started, yeah. So, yeah, the enemy. So the biggest problem was the enemy. So what happened after a few months? I basically faced a lot of doubts about Islam, like significant doubts. Because one of the key aspects of me becoming Muslim was that I had to, that I really believed in the inimitability of the Quran. Meaning the ijaz of the Quran from a linguistic point of view. I knew nothing about Arabic at that time, but it just made a lot of sense to me because it was a very rational argument based on Arabic history and not Arabic expression per se. And I thought it was a really powerful argument, but I got an email and it just really shocked my core. And really my mind was not convinced anymore, literally. But my soul was on fire, yeah? My soul was on fire. but my mind wasn't convinced. And that created such an internal trauma for me. I had to deal with it. But I knew instinctively, spiritually, naturally within me that this is the truth. You ain't going nowhere, Hamza, right? You're going nowhere, yeah? You need to sort this out. And I remember praying in sajda, asking Allah for conviction, asking Allah for certainty. And because it was an issue concerning the Quran, and because this was like 2003 or something, you don't really have internet, you don't have scholars around in the UK, I was like, let me try and find some answers. So I was within a certain group of people, I tried to ask questions, I didn't get any answers, so let me try and do it myself. So I went to the British Library, right? And the British Library at that time, you couldn't get in. You had to be a PhD student or an author or something. And I was neither at that time. But I got in somehow, yeah? I'm not going to tell you how I did that. It wasn't a big deal, but it was not right, yeah? So I was a bit flexible with the truth from that perspective. May Allah forgive me. But I got in. And I got all these books, you know, Martin Zamet, when he's a Dutch kind of scholar on the Quran, and I was getting like quotes. So I was like a Suyuti. If you know the Islamic tradition, Suyuti was a compiler of different statements of ulama and the classical tradition, and just bringing different opinions together. So I'm not a clever guy, I was just bringing things together. And I had this website called theinimitablequran.com. And I used to write stuff and put it together, you know, to create a robust case for the Quran. And by the way, I don't know anything about Arabic at this time, yeah? But I'm just putting things together, and this website started getting referred to. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I still wasn't thoroughly convinced. And when I went to British Library, I saw this PhD thesis by someone called Sami Al-Halawani, right? And the Al-Halawanis, if you know the Egyptian scholarly tradition from Al-Azhar, the Al-Halawani family are a very famous family. And this person's grandfather, when he passed away, the janazah was very long. They had a lot of esteem. I didn't know that at the time, obviously. So the PhD was about the inimitability of the Quran, the miraculous nature of the Quran. So I tried to ask the university to bring it to the British Library or get permission. I think they said it would take about 6 months. I waited that long. I think I waited that long, and I didn't get it. So I was like, you know what, Hamza, why don't you just learn Arabic yourself, man? What's the point trying to chase people and trying to chase books and trying to formulate things, and you don't really have any grounding in anything? Yes, you're trying to make sense of things. It's keeping you, you know, stable to a certain degree, but it's not enough. Go learn Arabic. So I called Talk Languages. I don't know if they exist anymore, but Talk Languages at that time was an online kind of school, and you learn languages from them and you get a tutor. The reason I know them because I used to learn Mandarin about a year or 2 years before I became Muslim, yeah? So I called them, I said, look, I need someone who knows Arabic rhetoric, is a kind of scholar of the language, he knows the 7 styles of recitation, or whatever. I said so many things. And they said, we found you somebody, yeah? Anyway, so I'm still in this kind of limbo, this intellectual crisis. You know, my soul knows Islam is true, but my brain is like all over the place, and I'm trying to get things together. So I'm working at that time, and I had to take the long line, what do you call it, that red line? The central line, yeah, I think it was towards the end of the central line. And I meet the tutor, and I think I gave him some of my story. You know, this is my story, I'm trying to find out about the Quran, and this is my journey, and I had this thesis, and I really need it, because I felt, from what I remember, that it was going to be the thing that would solve my intellectual crisis. And then he stands up and walks around his table, and he goes to a drawer, he picks up the thesis, and he puts it to me. He was the author. So I had no idea. I remember when I told Sheikh Abdurrahim Green this story, he said, if you don't believe in Allah now, you're an idiot. Yeah. So that was very powerful for me. It was like a sign, like, hey, you're on the right track kind of thing. And I remember he prayed, but he led Maghrib and he started crying. So moving on from that, he was my Arabic teacher for a while. Then moving on from that, I basically started to write a little bit more and start put things in the English language so the English-speaking audience can see why the Quran is miraculous from the point of view of its style and its structure. So that was one of my intellectual challenges, right? But at the same time, during that period, I had internal spiritual challenges, because for the first 4, 5, 6 years of me being a Muslim, I was connected maybe to a group of people that now I don't think was the best thing for me to do. Actually, it wasn't the best thing for me to do. I didn't know two major things which is very important for Muslims, and I want everyone in this room to take it so seriously, like their life depends on it, okay? And I want you to listen to this. Two things that I didn't know in the many years I was Muslim, 5, 6 years being Muslim. Number one, why Allah was worthy of worship. And number two, how to develop ikhlas and what is ikhlas. So yes, I knew God existed, I knew we had to pray, but that was it. The kind of essence of Islam, which was why Allah is worthy of worship, just didn't exist in my life, right? And me developing the idea of ikhlas, the fact that I have to do things for the sake of Allah, I didn't really knew what it meant and how to develop it. So I learned that later, and that's why I'm a little bit bitter, because I found that with new Muslims and with any Muslim, the fundamental things that you have to learn is fundamentally who Allah is, how you connect with Him, and why He is worthy of worship. Because this is the central theme of the Quran. This is the reason the Quran was revealed to us, to create those awakenings within us, right? So those are the two things I just want to elaborate very quickly on. So, with regards to worship, we have to understand as Muslims that Allah is worthy of worship, yes, because He gives us blessings, yes, because He gives us life, but fundamentally, Allah is worthy of worship because of who He is. We have a forced transactional relationship with Allah, meaning subconsciously and spiritually we think, me, you and Allah were like almost equal, na'udhu billah. That He gives you something, salah, He gives you food and a wife and kids and air, and you give Him something in return. Yes, it's true, we must be grateful for this, but there's something more fundamental we have to understand as Muslims, which is, we don't worship Allah because of those things per se. We worship Allah because of who Allah is. Allah is worthy of worship by virtue of His reality, because of who He is. And let me just elaborate this for you. Look, everyone likes Khabib, right? Great wrestler, right? Tapped out that chicken, McGregor, yeah? When he tapped him out, what did we say? Well, how did we react? Let's be honest.
Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar. We're like, yeah, wow, amazing, man, wicked, bruv, look at that, yeah? You were like in a state of, you were praising Khabib because of his wrestling abilities. What about football players? Messi or Mohamed Salah. One was an avid Liverpool fan. I remember he used to say, bro, I make dua for Liverpool to win during break time. And I was like, why? He said, you should make dua for everything, right? You make dua, right? Because Allah is in control, so make dua, right? When Mohamed Salah scores, I know how Mono goes. He goes crazy. Even in his 39, 40 years age now, yeah? He's like, oh, right? You give him praise because of, by virtue of his football skills, correct? Even for the older audience, what about poetry? Muhammad Iqbal, right? Great poet, when he said this sajda that you find so difficult frees you from 1,000 sajdas. Hi. Subhanallah. Amazing, right? Iqbal is a great poet. When he said, you know, the disbeliever, he is lost in the cosmos. But for the believer, the cosmos is lost in him. This is deep stuff, man. Right? And you're like, wow, Iqbal is amazing. He's the poet of the East. He's a great poet. Why do we react that way? Because we praise the poet because of, by virtue of his poetic skills. Even I do this with my children. When Zakaria was in the Muslim Scouts, he's still in the Muslim Scouts, but when he was running, you know, for the Scout Olympics, and I gave him some advice on, you know, what he needs to do, and it's not about winning, it's about being the best version of yourself kind of thing. And it was 200 meters, and, you know, I'm not Asian, so I wouldn't basically, typically, I know this is a stereotype, but I do apologize, you know, I'll be more expressive. You know, Greeks, we break plates at weddings, right? So very expressive people. So I had Ilyas, my other son, on my shoulders, and basically the marks person goes, on your marks, get set, go, and Zakaria starts running, and what do? I go ballistic. I'm like, come on, baby! Beautiful Zakaria! Amazing, baby! Beautiful! I don't care who's around. I don't give a damn. I'm praising my son because he's in the zone. He's in the flow state. If you study the flow state, he's in this flow state, right? And he does an amazing job. He comes second, and he looks at me as if to say to me, I saw something in myself I've never seen before. And I'm thinking to myself, why did I praise my son? I praised my son because I saw something in him that deserved praise. Now all of these things we praise. We praise Habib. We praise Muhammad Salah. We praise Iqbal. We praise Zakaria, my son. We praise these things. Something is compelled in our heart to praise them, even though they don't directly benefit us in any way. But we praise them because of their attributes, of sporting attributes, poetic attributes, fitness, whatever the case may be. But those attributes are deficient and flawed. They're not perfect. So what does it mean about praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whose names and attributes are to the highest degree possible, with no deficiency and no flaw? Allahu Akbar. Right? That's why Allah is worthy of worship, because of who He is. Even if we didn't exist, Allah is still worthy of worship. Even if the whole universe were to worship Allah, it wouldn't increase His bounty. Even if the whole universe and everything within it didn't worship Allah, it wouldn't decrease His bounty and His majesty and the fact that He's worthy of worship. So we worship Allah because of who He is, not necessarily what He's given us. I didn't really get that. And if you get that, your ibadah changes. Everything changes. Everything changes. And then you could talk about gratitude. And really what I'm giving you is a basic tafsir of the first line of Surah Al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All perfect praise and gratitude belongs to the Lord of everything that exists. That is the key to the Quran. It's Kitab. It's the key to the Quran. It's the key to your life. It's the key to your purpose. That first one line. So that's praise. What about gratitude? We think, oh yeah, I'm going to be grateful because I got a bit of clothes. I'm a handsome boy. MashaAllah, Ali is very handsome. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. You know, I got a pen. I've got water. I've got family. I've got shelter. Alhamdulillah. You know, I'm going to be grateful. No. That's a secondary gratitude. A Muslim must understand the primary gratitude. And the primary gratitude is your very existence. Not just life, but the potential to live a life. And we don't even think that because we're in a state of ghafla, we're in a state of heedlessness. Think about this, brothers, right? And the female jinn, right? So think about this. Everything right?
Yeah.
Good. Think about this. There is something in your life that you receive that is priceless, that you don't earn, own, or deserve. There is something in your life that you receive that is priceless, and you receive it every moment, and you don't earn, own, or deserve it. It's every moment of your existence. Not what happens in those moments, but the moments themselves, the potential for life. Why is it priceless? Because if I said to you, you had 10 hours left to live, but in order to live another 10 days, you have to give me all of your wealth, what would you do? You give me all of your wealth. So it shows that time, life, these moments are priceless. But Allah gives them to you for free. And you don't own them, earn them, or deserve them. You can't even create a fly. So if it's true that you receive this priceless gift every moment that you don't earn, own, or deserve, how should it make you feel? How should it make you feel? You're receiving this priceless gift every moment that you don't earn, own, or deserve. How should it make you feel?
Grateful.
Grateful. This is primary gratitude. These are the lenses we must put on our eyes or our heart in order to understand ourselves and the whole world. And if you always have this gratitude, I'm telling you, you can never ever complain. So this is why Allah is worthy of worship. There's much more to it than that, but I didn't get that. And that's what we need to understand. That was one of the challenges. And alhamdulillah, I overcame that challenge by coming back to the Islamic tradition, the mainstream Islamic tradition, the Quran and the Sunnah, in accordance to the understanding of our classical scholarship and our pious predecessors, which is very deep, it's very spiritual, and it's very powerful. The other thing was about ikhlas. The thing about ikhlas, brothers, is that we think, yeah, for the sake of Allah. Hamza, you must do this talk for the sake of Allah. It's become almost like a spiritual cliche, like a slogan. What does for the sake of Allah actually mean? And it was very
it was after a few years that I realized, or many years I realized, that ikhlas means three major things. That you're doing it for three major things. You're doing it because Allah is worthy of it, and because you love Him. Because remember, worship means to know Allah, to love Allah, to obey Allah, and to direct all acts of worship to Allah alone. The internal acts of worship of the heart, like love and tawakkul, and the external acts of worship, like sadaqah and so forth. So what was very important is that you do it because Allah is worthy of the act and because you love Him. That's the first thing. That's what ikhlas is. The second thing is that you're doing it for divine reward. Doing the deed just for Allah's reward is also ikhlas. And the third one was doing it to prevent yourself from the consequences of disobedience and the consequences of denying and rejecting Allah's mercy and guidance, which is the nar, the fire. So those are the three things that formulate ikhlas in a way. You're doing it because you love Allah and He's worthy of that act. You're doing it because you want His reward. And you're doing it because you want to shield yourself from the fire. You could do it for any of those. Any of them. But the ulama say doing it for all of them is best. And I didn't know how to develop ikhlas. But when you go back to the Quran and the Sunnah, as understood by a classical scholarship, our pious predecessors, right? Mainstream Islam, we have the spiritual tools to teach us on how to develop our ikhlas. For example, point number 1, do an act, do a deed every day outside of the obligations that only you and Allah knows. This was an advice of the 14th century polymath and scholar Ibn Taymiyyah. May Allah have mercy on him. Do an action every day outside of the fara'id, right, obviously, that only you and Allah knows. That would help you develop ikhlas. And one of those things could be freeing your heart from hatred or enmity or jealousy. You know the famous hadith about the person that was an inhabitant of paradise. The Prophet said, this person is an inhabitant of paradise. And one Sahabi stayed with him for 3 days and he didn't see anything special. And he asked him, how comes you know you're this special person? And he answered by saying that he freed his heart from these ailments. That's an action of the heart. You can do that every day and no one's going to know apart from you and Allah. And that's going to help develop your ikhlas. Second point to develop your ikhlas, which is extremely important. Understand the consequences of not having ikhlas. It's meaningless. On the day of judgment you get 0. You see me here, I've been in the da'wah for over a decade. Ali Dawah's been doing da'wah for a long time. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, Allah has given him a social acceptance. May Allah preserve him and protect him and increase him. And you know, I find his journey very inspirational, even his development very inspirational, because you know when someone goes up and up spiritually and intellectually, and I'm not saying this to throw dust in his face, I'm saying it as an encouragement, yeah? It is just empowering, yeah? So, you see all of this, you get, you know, maybe many shahadas, you know, I'm the CEO of IERA, we get thousands of shahadas, we have all our reports. All of that is going to be 0 on the day of judgment if you didn't do it for the sake of Allah. If you didn't do it because you love Him. If you didn't do it because He's worthy of it. If you didn't do it because you wanted His reward. And if you didn't do it because you want to prevent yourself from the nar. If you didn't do it for any of those things, then you're in trouble. On the day of judgment, on your balance, you're going to see nothing. So your actions are meaningless. They don't mean anything. They're fake. And that would take you to the fire. So understand the consequences of not having ikhlas. The other thing is to understand the consequences of having ikhlas. If you have ikhlas, what happens? Jannah. You're eligible for divine mercy. Think about what divine mercy actually means. It's paradise. The famous hadith. Let me paraphrase the famous hadith. That the person who suffered a whole lifetime, they'll be dipped in paradise for a moment. And they would be asked, did you ever suffer? And they would say, Wallahi, I've never suffered. That's paradise. It is the state in which you don't want to be in any other state. That is happiness, right? True happiness, true bliss. So that's paradise. So understand, the way to get there is with ikhlas. Doing things for the sake of Allah, as we just described. The other thing, and this will be the final thing concerning ikhlas, but there's many more. And this is very important. And this is something that was a huge challenge for me that I wasn't taught. I had to find it, and then I was taught it in some way. Focus on your heart. Allah says in the Quran that no one's going to be saved from the Day of Judgment except the one with a sound, not a sound mind, not a sound liver, or a sound bicep, or a sound left hook. A sound heart. How do you develop the heart? From a context of ikhlas, because ikhlas really lies in the heart. And the heart can be hardened, it could be softened, it could be covered, it could be darkened, it could be unlocked. So we need to make sure the heart is unlocked and soft so ikhlas can develop. We neglect this in our practice. We're very external when it comes to the deen. Oh, he's got a big beard, mashallah. Don't get me wrong, that's a beautiful thing. But let me tell you something, even goats have beards. The only reason we respect the beard is because something inside is happening as well. That we love Allah, we love the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Both of them have to come together. Islam is bringing the external and the internal. When you look at the books of hadith, they start with what hadith? Actions are in accordance to the intention. Where's the intention? Is it here? Is it in your kneecap? Is it in your pancreas? It's in your heart. So we need to work on this in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah and the way of our scholarship, our pious predecessors. So how do you unlock the heart, soften the heart so you could have ikhlas, so you could do things for the sake of Allah? So your acts of worship can have meaning and they can be accepted and you come closer to Allah. Well, there's a range of things that I think you have to do without a doubt in the West. In our home, Britain, right? And we should definitely consider our home. We should definitely consider British society as our people. Just like the Anbiya, when they said, Ya qawmi, oh my people. They had this concern and compassion for people, right? So, living here in our home, we have challenges, like everywhere in the world there's challenges. But those challenges are intellectual and spiritual. And fundamentally, intellectual challenges are really spiritual challenges anyway. Because the aql, the intellect, is a function of the heart in Islam. So this is the way to soften and unlock the heart. Ready? I want you to write this down in your head, in your phone. I don't care if you're scribbling now. This is so important. Number one, make sure obviously you pray and do your fara'id. But in your salah, make sure you know what you're saying. It will change your salah. Don't be an automaton. Don't be a robot when you're praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Learn, find out what you're saying. SubhanAllah, if you fell in love with a woman and she was French, you would learn French. You learn French poetry and you know what it means as well. But who created that woman? Who created love? Who is the loving? Al-Hudud, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So learn, find out what you're saying. What are you saying in Surah Al-Fatiha? What are you saying in Sajda? What are you saying in the different movements? Try and feel it, right? This is the inner dimension of salah. This is not a made-up thing. This is part of our tradition. Our ulama would write about the inner dimensions of worship, right? It's not just a tick box exercise. You have to be present, right? So be present in your salah. Talk to Allah in sajda. It will change your salah based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Second point, very important. Do your dhikr in the morning and the evening. This is an absolute must. It is your shield. It is your protection. It is your elevation. It is your means of closeness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a means of understanding your utter dependency on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is your spiritual progress. It is everything. Just from experience. More doubts came when I didn't do dhikr and made dua. More issues came. There was a correlation. I would bring someone back to Islam and I'll give them a great answer and I want to be convinced in the answer. And that's because my spiritual state at that time was just, not even doing sunnah. So, and this is from practice. And it's not just my practice. You have 1400 years of people telling you this stuff. It works. And looking back at other people is actually a Quranic perspective. Because what does Allah say in the Quran? يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب للذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Oh, you have believed, fasting has been prescribed for you like it was prescribed before you. There's other people that did it, it worked, right? So that principle is there. We have an amazing rich tradition. So do your dhikr in the morning and the evening. If you don't know what that means, ask someone that knows. It will change the way you understand yourself, the way you relate to yourself, the way you relate to other people, and the way you relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing to develop your ikhlas from the heart point of view is to do tadabbur of the Quran. And also to recite the Quran. Recite the Quran because Allah says it is a healing and a mercy for the believers. And that's going to soften your heart. And it's going to help you develop your ikhlas. The other thing is, which is a neglected practice, is to do tadabbur of the Quran. Allah says in the Quran, do they not reflect and ponder over the Quran, or there are locks on their hearts? Now you could mirror the meaning. The more tadabbur you do, the more pondering you do over the Quran, the more your heart becomes unlocked to receive His guidance and mercy. This doesn't mean you're changing the meaning. Meaning is tafsir. We can't do that. We're not qualified. Leave it to the ulama. But once you know the meaning, even if it's the basic meaning, try and ponder over it. How does it affect my life? Because the minute you have that relationship with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things are going to awaken within you. You're going to have, your heart is going to be unlocked. There are many locks on the hearts, on the heart, and the heart will be unlocked. Okay? So engage in tadabbur of the Quran, in pondering of the book, over the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are some of the things that we need to engage with, which are extremely important, that would help us, especially living in our context. And please take this extremely, extremely seriously. So these were some of the challenges, and I learned them relatively late after I became a Muslim. The other thing which I learned relatively late, which was the whole idea, and what I mean by learn is really internalized it, which was the idea of the nafs and the ego in the Islamic tradition, right? So Allah talks about arrogance in the Quran. Allah gives us an example of shaitan. Shaitan should be our teacher. And you're thinking, what is Hamza saying? He should teach us how not to be. Now if you look at shaitan, Allah tells him to bow down to Adam. How did he respond? Shaitan's kufr wasn't a kufr, it wasn't a rejection of the truth, a disbelief of the mind. It was a state. He was in a state of kibr. It was so high arrogance, it took him away. So what did he basically say? He said, no, I'm not going to bow down. I'm better. Right? I'm better. That's what he was saying. I'm made of fire, he's made of clay. I'm not going to be imposed upon. I'm going to impose. Right? I'm going to look good. He's going to look bad. I'm right. Allah is wrong. So from this point of view, what we learn from shaitan is what the nafs is about. The blameworthy nafs. And what's the nafs? What's the ego in the Islamic tradition? I always want to be right. I never want to be wrong. I always want to look good. I never want to look bad. I always want to impose. I never want to be imposed upon. Excessively to the degree that you're not true to yourself anymore. And look what happened to shaitan. And I realized that. And when I realized that, brothers, it really made me change the way I related to myself, related to others, and related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And let me give you a story. So remember when I said my dad was a hero? Remember that? I know it's been long, but I think these are really important lessons. Because my dad was a hero, the minute I became Muslim, well, maybe not the minute, but very shortly after, I had to break my hero. Because I had this issue in my head. I'm Muslim now, he's my dad, he's supposed to still be my hero, but he can't be my hero because he's not Muslim. So I spent around maybe 6 years making my dad feel like an incompetent father. Taking his mistakes, making the small mistakes, even the medium mistakes, and making them huge. Trying to rip into him, to expose him. I had no adab, no akhlaq. I remember once we had this big debate about something, I was ripping into him, and he ran into the garden, he was smoking away, and he said, is this how Islam teaches you to treat your father? SubhanAllah, yeah. So it was such ajib stuff, such crazy things the way I was behaving towards my dad, because I had this false idea, this kind of binary understanding. And what happened was, I remember telling my mum, oh, my dad's dead for me. But then I realized that this was all ego, it was all my nafs. And there was a moment on one Sunday, because I went to this course that made me realize this. The homework was to create a breakthrough with someone. So I realized, and I called my dad, I was like, Dad. And I hardly spoke to him because he was in Greece taking care of his father, nursing his father. I said, Dad, I just want to let you know that I'm really sorry. That you're still my hero. Yes, we have different beliefs, but you're still my hero in many ways. Just like the Prophet ﷺ would say good things about non-Muslims, about their virtues, about their justice, or their wisdom. Khalid bin Walid became Muslim because the Prophet ﷺ called him wise, right? And I understood that this was all my ego. To the excessive degree that I wasn't true to myself anymore, that I wasn't true to the tradition anymore, that I wasn't true to Allah, and I wasn't true to the Messenger, and I wasn't true to our ethics. And I spoke to my dad and I was crying. I said, Dad, you're still my hero. I love you. Please forgive me. It's all my fault. And my dad cried. That's I think the third time I see my father cry. And then we created such a breakthrough that we've got such a good relationship now that when I talk to him about Islam or the Sunnah in the car, on the way back he says, you know the things you told about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? I believe he was a prophet. That would never have happened if I was the same old person with this ego and this nafs. So that was very important. And those tools are in our tradition, but I wasn't given it because I wasn't with the right people. So finally, the last two things I want to say before we have a quick Q&A is every single human being has the truth inside them. Because our first principle, or one of our first principles in Islam, is that every human being, Muslim and non-Muslim, has a fitrah. Something has been created within them, and inside that fitrah has a form of knowledge. You call it primary knowledge or proto-knowledge, whatever you want to call it. That knowledge primarily is that Allah is a reality and He's worthy of praise. But because, as per the hadith in Sahih Muslim, the parents corrupt the fitrah. It gets clouded, if you like. And not just parents, but society and many different things. So everyone has that truth within them. But the fitrah gets clouded. Our job as Muslims is to try and create awakenings within people. Help people's fitrah become unclouded to awaken the truth within. And that's not only done with rational arguments. In actual fact, not many people become Muslim just because of rational arguments. I'm on my third postgrad in philosophy. And I'm telling you, even knowing all this philosophical mumbo jumbo, yeah, on a very advanced level, I'm telling you, don't tell me about people's philosophical ideas. Tell me about their practice. That's how you get to know someone. Get to understand people's context. They may even have an intellectual question, but most of the time, it's because something else is going on. Yes, maybe you need rational arguments. That may uncloud the fitrah. But there are other things that can uncloud the fitrah, like akhlaq and adab. Be a good Muslim. Allah says in chapter 41, verse 34, good and evil are not the same. Repel by that which is better. And between two people there was hatred, it would turn into intimate friendship. Now the Arabic word repel is not followed by a direct object here in the Quran. It's as if Allah is saying repel anything by that which is better. And the ulama say what is better is repelling things by which is more virtuous and by that which is more beautiful. So become people of virtue, become people of beauty, just like the Sahaba. There was one Sahabi who was giving breadcrumbs to an anthill next to his house. And they were saying, what are you doing? He was like, well, on the day of judgment, I don't want to be held to account that I didn't give the rights to my neighbor. That's how they internalized the tradition. It wasn't just mouthpiece, because they understood that knowledge wasn't just memorizing abstract things. That they became those things, they internalized it. You have to memorize and internalize. You can learn all the hadith on dhikr, all the ayat on dhikr, and you will never become a person of dhikr. You have to engage on this type of path in line with the Quran and the Sunnah and our tradition to internalize it. And that for me is not attending even talks like this. This is spiritual diabetes, right? We all got spiritual diabetes and this is your spiritual insulin and you get Iman boost for a while, then it goes back down again. Yes, Iman rate rises and it falls for sure. But the real hard work is, if you have an after Fajr class with a sheikh, you sit at his feet. Because wallahi, you will learn things from a scholar you will never learn from a book. And this is part of our tradition. That's why you have to have someone that you're connected with in some way. It could be 5 scholars, 2 scholars, whoever it is. Just sit with people who have experience. This is part of our tradition. The Prophet ﷺ even had a scholar. It was Jibreel alayhi salam. The Sahaba had a scholar. The Prophet ﷺ. The Tabi'een had scholarship. Because there's a kind of unwritten spiritual thing goes on that you learn humility from that. And even in cognitive science, in any wisdom tradition, you can't be an autodidact, meaning you can't learn yourself. You need someone to teach you. The Imam here, the Imam at the back, the Mashayikh that you know, they had teachers. 1, 2, 3, 5, 10. The point is they went through that process. And it's humbling. You know, and you go through that process. So that's very important to consider. So we have to internalize, and we have to understand that everyone has a fitrah, and that we can awaken that fitrah different ways. So it could be through good character, it could be through rational arguments, it could be through morality, it could be through getting people to think. The point is, because everyone has that within them, you need to be committed to people's well-being. All people, Muslim, non-Muslim. Be committed to their well-being. We should be a beacon of light in Britain for the rest of our community, to the rest of our citizens, to the rest of our brothers and sisters in humanity. Be a beacon of light. This is a sunnah. Let me give you some dalil and I end on this. The Prophet ﷺ said in a famous hadith that was compiled by An-Nawawi in his Arba'een, it's also in Bukhari. The Prophet said, you won't truly believe unless you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Here is akhihi, your brother. This doesn't only mean Muslim brotherhood. And Nawawi himself in his explanation said this means human beings, but from what perspective? It means your brother insists in humanity from the perspective that you want goodness for them and guidance for them. So you should want goodness for people and guidance for all people. This is echoed by another hadith in Musnad Ahmad. This is echoed by another hadith in Bukhari, narrated by Bukhari, but it's in Tariq al-Kabir, and it's sahih, it's authentic. For example, Albani made it authentic. He rendered it authentic, sahih, and the Arabic is that you should love for linnas, you should love for humanity, for people what you love for yourself. And what does love for others what you love for yourself mean? It means love, guidance for everybody and goodness for everybody. Even a famous Maliki scholar, Ibn Taqiq al-Eid, he did a commentary on similar hadith and he said the same thing. So what does it mean as Muslims? It means that we must be committed to people's well-being, which means you want goodness for people and you want guidance for people. And it also means that if you truly believe, you should love for others what you love for yourself. If you love Allah and His Messenger the most, give that love to other people. So really, sharing Islam is sharing that love.